Well, so you go away for just a week, and it's wild because I was gone only last Sunday, but in some ways, it felt like I had been gone for weeks and weeks. And part of that is a really cool thing of I saw some new faces this morning that apparently were here last week that was not here to meet and see, and even more new faces this morning. And I say all that. It's funny because Troy even pray about that too, about just being grateful of God sending folks our way, and we're so grateful, man. If you're new with us, we're really excited that you're here. We hope you feel welcome. We hope you feel connected and all of that. One of the things I will say real quick, kind of sideways tied to that, if you find it difficult to find a parking space out in the parking lot, bear with us. If you find it difficult to find a seat in the auditorium, bear with us. We are working on plans for all of that. And what a good problem to have, right? Have a hard time finding a parking spot and a place to sit. That means that there's something God's doing, and a lot of folks want to be a part of it and be here. So we're just a few weeks past the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl is kind of like a cultural phenomenon. Whether you are a sports person or not, whether you're into it or not, everybody kind of gears up for it. But that also means that it marks the end of the football season. And if you're like me, I'm a football and a baseball kind of guy. You kind of go into this abyss of really nothing. And spring training, baseball, yeah, I know, but it's not really baseball. Now we're in NASCAR and basketball season. And I'm just not into those kinds of things. And I guess we're in hockey season. Honestly, it seems like hockey never really ends. It's just like year-round kind of thing. They just kind of keep on going at it. But no matter what kind of sports fan that you're in, and maybe not even a sports fan, there is something that kind of happens within watching. No matter what kind of sport it is, there is this phenomenon that happens within all of us, and it is called armchair quarterbacking. Everybody kind of from time to time finds themselves participating in armchair quarterbacking. What that is basically when we are sitting at home in our armchair, on our couch, or even there at the game in the stands, and we're watching the game, we're watching the event go on, and we somehow seem to know better of how they should be playing and what they should be doing. You might see a play go on. You think, if they had just passed instead of kept that with them, the game would have been so much better. Or if they had pitted earlier, instead of waiting, then this or that, or whatever it is you say when you watch hockey, because I don't know hockey and what's going on. If you had gotten in a fight earlier, because that's all I know about hockey is you get in a fight. I don't know what it is. But what happens is that we kind of get caught up in the game, we get caught up in the event, and we find ourselves feeling like we know how things should have gone, and we totally kind of forget in the moment that, number one, we're not down there under the pressure, under the gun, having all these things happening, and we forget that we have all these camera angles, seeing things that the players do not see. But we're so confident that we know how things should have gone in that moment, right? Well, I think the truth is we actually do this in a variety of ways in all of our life. I think there are some times in life that we armchair quarterback other things. We look at situations and we think, well, they shouldn't have done it that way. What they should have done was done this. You know what happens if you're a parent? It happens when the school systems call off school for the day because of a weather event. You look out your window and there's no snow, or there's no whatever. Why do we call off school? Or maybe we do it with local government. We look at situations and we say, what they should have done. Maybe they're fixing a bridge or they're paving a road. What they should have done is this or that. And we come up with all these different things that we're just so confident that if we had chosen it, maybe it was at work and it was a new policy, if we had decided, if we had been in charge, we would have done things differently, and we're confident that things would have been so much better because we would have done it. Well, today, as we kind of keep on moving through this series we're doing, we're in week 3 of this series we're calling Portraits of Jesus, and where we're looking at portraits of the character of Jesus. We're not looking at literal pictures of Jesus because we don't have those, but we're looking at the portraits of his character, of who he was and what he was all about. And the hope is that as we look at these portraits of his character, that we can begin to emulate those and kind of live them out in our own lives, because we are meant to be disciples. We're meant to be following Jesus, not just to be people who believe in him or who ring him up whenever we need a little bit of help, but people who are growing more and more in our faith and living like him. Now, a couple weeks ago when we started, we talked about forgiveness and that difficult moment, that difficult thing of trying to remember the forgiveness that we were given and that we were shared to, or from God to us, and how we need to be willing to give that to others as well. And then last week, I'm so grateful that Bob was able to step in and preach for me, and from what I heard, did a wonderful job. But as he talked about commitment. And even the commitment of Jesus of no matter, from the very get-go, even from the very beginning of time, of how he was committed to buying or to redeeming us back, to bringing us back into that relationship. And today, as you've heard, we're going to talk about compassion. We're going to look at a few situations where Jesus has compassion on some people. 3 different situations where I think if we had been in those situations, maybe we would have done things a little bit different. And I'm not saying that we would have done it better. We probably wouldn't have done better. But as we look at these situations, I want us to see how Jesus reacts to these different types of people and different situations, different scenarios, and see how he reacts. Because again, the whole point of us doing this is to be reminded or to see the things that we should be living out. And I got to tell you too, as I kind of was like thinking through this series and the different times of what characteristics we were going to study, this one kind of popped to the surface in my heart and in my mind. Because the truth is, I think there's some of the different situations we're going to see, maybe not the specifics of them, but the type of situations. I think there are a lot of people, at least within our circles, that are going through some different things and needing the compassion of Jesus, but maybe even needing our compassion within a church family. So again, the hope is that as we look at these things, we can see how we can live them out. We're going to start in the Gospel of Luke. If you have your Bibles and you want to go there, we're going to be in Luke chapter 8. We'll have the text up on the screen as well. And also there's some Bibles in front of you if you want to grab one and follow along there. Or feel free to get your digital device out and thumb through on the screen there. But we're going to be in Luke chapter 8, and we're going to pick up kind of a big section, but we're going to break up some of these different ones and some smaller ones. So let's start in verse 40. It says this: "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus went on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped." Now let's kind of pause right there for a second and make sure we get kind of the whole picture of what's going on, the whole context of what's happening there. Jesus and his followers, his disciples, they've kind of sailed across the Sea of Galilee and they land there. They kind of pull their boat up on maybe the shore or a dock or whatever. And when they get out, they find that a crowd finds out where he is and they start gathering around to see him and to hear from him, maybe to even be healed in the situation. And while they're there, this religious leader shows up to Jesus and he comes and he asks for help. He's specifically asking for help for his daughter because she's dying. And so he goes up to Jesus, asks for help. Jesus starts to head on his way to go and help this girl. But as he's doing that, this woman sneaks into this tight crowd and goes up, this woman who's been bleeding for years now, and she grabs the edge of his robe and she's healed. Now, why would this woman sneak in there? I mean, if everybody is there to see Jesus because they know of what he's capable of doing, that he's a great teacher, but he's also able to heal, why wouldn't she just go up and say, "Hey, Jesus, I need help too. I know you're going to help this guy's daughter, but I need help as well"? Well, for one thing, when you ask for help, you typically have to say what you need help with. And I mean, this situation is probably kind of embarrassing for her to have to go and explain what she needed help with. But not only that, she would have probably been considered ceremonially unclean because of her condition. And so this was embarrassing for her to have to go into this moment and to go to Jesus in this way and to need help in this way. But let's see how Jesus reacts in verse 45 now. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, and I know that the power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could no longer go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now remember, this woman is not supposed to be there. She is unclean, and there's a good chance by her being around these people, touching other people, she's technically making them ceremonially unclean as well. And so she kind of presses into this place where not only there's a lot of people, but then there's this really special guy, Jesus, there. I mean, this is kind of an important thing. People are seeing this as an important moment of what Jesus is doing. And so she shows up to this really important place with this really important person as these crowds are gathering around. And so when she squeezes in there, this outcast, this unimportant person, she shows up and she needs help. But how does Jesus react? Well, Jesus has compassion on the outcast. He has compassion on her. Look, Jesus was on his way to do something important. He was on his way to help out a man whose daughter was dying. And I mean, for us to be in a situation like that, no doubt we feel the same way of this need of Jesus. But he took the time to stop and to notice someone. And not only to just notice her, but to love her and to extend value to her, to show that she was of value. And man, it can be easy for us in our life, though, to miss people, to kind of roll through life and to get going in things, to get wrapped up in our own things that we're doing, to get wrapped up in our own schedules, to get wrapped up in all of the different things that are going on. And sometimes they are good things. A lot of times they're good things that we just get kind of wrapped up in, and we don't notice the people around us. We don't notice the outcasts around us. But even sometimes we can even get wrapped up in our own troubles, in our own problems, our own pain, our own issues, and also not see the others who are around us who feel like an outcast as well, and they need the attention as well. You know, this happens to me from time to time. I'll be the first to admit that I'm the type of person that I can really kind of put my head down, get rolling on something, get rolling in life, get busy in life, and then you look up after a while and you're like, man, I missed that opportunity. I missed those things. And again, many times it's good things. And we miss these things, and really more importantly, we miss these people. Maybe someone who just doesn't need to be fixed even, but just needs to be noticed. Someone that just needs someone to see them as who they are. Maybe it's in the midst of their pain and their struggles. Maybe they just want someone to finally notice them and what they're going through. And this is what Jesus did. And because she was healed, you know, when she touched his robe, that was a wonderful thing. The power coming from Jesus, healing her in that way. In many ways, Jesus could have just kept on going. He could have been like, okay, yeah, I healed her. I mean, he knew what the situation was. He knew who it was, but he stopped. And he wanted people to notice what was happening. He wanted her to come forward. He wanted to have this moment with her because he even called her daughter. I mean, what a powerful moment that probably was for her. I think, when was the last time this woman was called daughter? I mean, we don't know the situation with her family. We don't know if they're around, if they're connected to her, but because of her condition, she probably couldn't live with them. She probably couldn't live around people. But now, this important man takes a moment to stop. I mean, everybody wants to be there, but he stops everything and calls her daughter and notices her. He has this compassion on her. Sure, we can get in life, we can get rolling, but friends, we need to sometimes slow up and stop and take time to just slow down and see people and have compassion on them. Well, the second situation comes from the Gospel of John, in John chapter 8. This is probably a situation that we kind of are very, very familiar with, and we know a lot about within this situation. We find in John 8, in verse 2, it says, "At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, and the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?'" Now, again, let's kind of pause for a second and get the whole picture of what's going on here. Jesus is there in the synagogue. He's teaching. He's doing these good, important, wonderful things. Then all of a sudden, these religious leaders show up with this woman who was caught in adultery. And there's a lot wrapped up in that moment, just that thought right there, that she was caught in adultery. I mean, let's just be honest. That's not like the thing that happens out in the open, okay? So for them to have caught her, they must have known where she was, and for them to have then just happened to be around where Jesus was and to bring her to there. I mean, let's just recognize it for what it was. They were setting this woman up. And not only that, they bring this woman there, and well, it takes two to tango, as they say. So where was the guy? But they drag her into there, and they had no concern about the law. They had no real concern about learning of how they should really apply the law of Moses. They were using her as a pawn to try and set up a trap for Jesus. And in their minds, they had him trapped. Because if Jesus were to say, you know, oh, well, you know, don't worry about her, we're going to forgive her, well, then they could have said, well, but why don't you obey the law of Moses? But if Jesus had condemned her, then they would have said, well, why are you such a harsh, mean person? You talk all this compassion and love. Where is it now? For those of you, do we have any Star Trek fans in the room? Any Trekkies out there? Oh, wow, Bill, man, just only one. Okay, we got a little bit of one back here. There is within the Star Trek world this test that they give all their captains called the Kobayashi Maru test. And it's a no-win situation. They put these cadets into this situation where no matter what you do, you're going to fail. And the whole point of it is not to pass the test. The whole point is they want to see how these people react and how they handle the stress of the situation. Well, these religious leaders, they've brought to Jesus really a no-win situation because, again, no matter what he does, they're ready to pounce on him. But I love how Jesus, who really the master of all situations, I love how he reacts. It says this in verse 6 now. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who had heard began to go away, one at a time, the oldest ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. And Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Now go and leave your life of sin." You know, we don't know what Jesus was writing there on the ground. We don't know what he was writing in the dirt there. There's lots of speculation about different things that he could have been writing. But the truth is that's really not important. What's important is what he says next. He tells them, look, if any of you don't have any sin in your life, any of you who are perfect, have never broken the law, never done anything wrong, go right ahead. Pick up a stone and you fire away. And it was interesting even how it says who went away first, that the oldest went away first. They probably started thinking through all the things in their life, and they thought, man, I got a lot of reasons to have the stones cast at me. And then after a while, they're all gone. It's just the two of them, just Jesus and her. And he says, look, no one's here to condemn you, and neither do I. And we see here that Jesus had compassion on the sinner. And it's sad to say that these religious leaders really didn't care about this woman. They really didn't even care about Jesus and what he was teaching. Again, they were just using her as a pawn. They were just hoping that he would take some kind of action and do something so that they could finally have him cornered and finally have him in trouble. And I think sometimes it's sad to say, but this is still a struggle for a lot of Christians today, where they want to find ways to point out the sin of others. They want to find ways to nitpick other people's lives. Well, did you hear about so-and-so? Did you hear about you-know-who and what they did? And it's like in that moment that we elevate ourselves to this place of holiness and perfection that really we've never achieved and we've really never been to. We forget about the sin that maybe just hasn't been exposed in our own life. And maybe that hidden sin that we still are struggling with over and over again. And again, this happens a lot within God's people. Maybe we hear of businesses or individuals who get in trouble for unethical business practices. Maybe they're embezzling or stealing money or whatever, and we judge them. Oh, I can't believe that they would take in that way. But then on the flip side, there are many today who steal from God. And you may think, well, how do you steal from God? Well, the book of Malachi tells us we withhold the blessings that God has given us and not give back to him. We are stealing from God. Or maybe we hear of a person whose marriage is falling apart because of unfaithfulness, and we judge them, and we say things like, well, I can't believe that would happen. All while within so many families, things like pornography and lust permeate throughout those families. We hear things of news of violence and shootings going on, and we judge them. Well, I can't believe people would do such awful things, all while personally we commit our own acts of violence and murder within our heart. Jesus tells us if we hate our brothers and sisters, then we have murdered them in our heart. And so it's easy for us to look at someone else's life. It's easy for us to look at someone else's sin and get all righteous and feel good about ourselves, all while forgetting about the sin that we have in our own lives, the embarrassment and the shame that would come into our own life if those things were revealed. And Jesus steps into this situation and simply has compassion on her. Now, he doesn't leave it there of just the compassion. He tells her, look, go and leave this life of sin. Don't sin anymore in this way. Don't live this way anymore. But he does it with love and compassion. Well, there's one more situation that I want us to look at. And it's in John chapter 11. And this time I want us to kind of pretty much read the whole situation here. Not the entire thing, but a big chunk of it. So I want you to hang with me as we kind of move through this. And I want us to catch what's happening in this one. This one is in John 11, verse 20 now. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at a place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. This is a passage that many times I've used within funeral services and many times shared with families going through the pain and the sorrow of losing a loved one. But the truth is that I think it extends even beyond just the situation of losing a loved one. I think many times this situation of these emotions that these women are going through is the emotions that we go through whenever anything hard comes into our life, anytime that we feel a hardship and pain coming in. Because the way that they go to him and they react almost so frustrated with Jesus, so upset with Jesus that he's there now. They say to him, "If you had been here," both of them say this, "if you had been here, our brother would not have died." And I think we feel like that when we go through pain. I think we say to God things like, "God, if you had been there, I wouldn't have lost my job. God, if you had been there, my child wouldn't have made that decision. God, if you had been there, my family member, my parent wouldn't have died. God, if you had been there, I wouldn't have been hurt. They wouldn't have hurt me." And we could go on and on. When we're in pain, it's so easy to look to God, to look to Jesus and say, "Where were you?" And we know what happens with this situation. We know that eventually Jesus is there at the tomb and he tells them, "Hey, roll away the stone." And they're like, "Jesus, I don't think we should do that. He's been in there for a few days and he probably stinks. It's probably awful." But he says, "Do it anyways." And he calls his name and Lazarus comes out alive. And that's an awesome and powerful and great thing. And if that was all that really happened, I think a really big moment would be missed. Because they had their brother back, and they were neck deep in sorrow and pain because of all this. And sometimes we get into those situations where we want it to be fixed. We want the moment to be made right. But we see Jesus' reaction to the moment is not just to rush in and to heal the situation, heal their brother, bring him back to life. But again, that's how we usually want it, right? My day's going bad. My life's going bad. My week's going bad. My job stinks. My kids are crazy. All this stuff is terrible. God, just fix all these things. Why aren't you there? But instead of God just swooping into this moment of pain and hardship for them, instead we see in John 11:35, it simply says Jesus wept. Before Jesus stepped in to heal this dead man, before Jesus stepped in to fix their pain, Jesus wept. And Jesus shared in their pain and their sorrow. And by doing that, Jesus had compassion on the hurting. You see, Jesus doesn't stand at a distance in our life. And he doesn't say, "Hey, I'll pray for you," like we sometimes do with people, right? And then we just move on with life and never actually pray for them. He doesn't just look at the hard things going in our life and just say, "Well, let me fix that real quick," and kind of take all the pain away and move on. No, I think many times in the midst of our hardships, in the midst of our pain, Jesus steps into that pain and lives in that pain with us. And I believe that when we weep, Jesus weeps with us. He weeps when we lose that loved one. He weeps when we feel the loss of that relationship crumbling. He weeps when we feel the debt that is around us just pushing us down. We feel like we can't crawl out from under it. And sure, it would be nice to have the genie in the bottle that we could have 3 wishes and just voila, it's all fixed and we can move on. But I think that would be so cold and heartless for Jesus to just do that and to simply move on, but not to take the time to step into that moment with us like he did here. Jesus has compassion on us when we hurt by stepping into that moment with us and carrying that burden, carrying that hurt with us. So how do we do this then? How do we become people that can be compassionate like Jesus to other people? Well, I think the first thing that we can do is we can slow up. I think in our life, we really need to slow up. And I think I think in life, we just get running so fast and we get at a pace of life where we're going and going and going and we're busy. And many times, we make the excuse of, well, when this kind of ends, then life will slow up, right? And then we get to that moment where whatever you're talking about, whether it's your kid's sports or your job project or whatever it might be, it's over. And then the next thing pops in and you run on. Or maybe you're like a person that's like, well, when I retire finally, life will slow up enough. I'm not retired, but there's enough retired people in my life, they tell me that they're even more busy now than they were when they were working. They're like, I don't know how I had time to work in the first place. The truth is that we move at such a fast pace, and we go at a breakneck speed, and we don't slow down, but we need to slow up in life. First of all, so that we can notice the people in our life who need some compassion. We can notice those situations where someone needs to be noticed. Someone needs someone to come alongside them and to share in their pain with them. So maybe that means taking that coffee break with a coworker who's going through a hardship and listening to them and letting them unload. Maybe that means taking some time to spend with your kids and just sit at the dinner table and to say no to some other things, even if it's late, even if it means missing something else in life. Maybe it means just slowing up. And then once we notice those situations, kind of like what Troy was mentioning, actually doing something about it, taking some action. Because if we don't slow up, we're not going to see it. But then if we don't slow up enough to then do something about it, then what's the point? Because so often I think we see situations, and when we do see them, we're still running so fast that sure, we see them, oh, I'll pray for that, and then we move on, and we've really done nothing to try and make a difference and to show any kind of compassion. Friends, we need to slow up. But maybe even in the midst of slowing up, maybe there are some times that we need to slow up on things of like the judgment in our situations. I mean, we don't know why they're in those times. We don't know why they're in those hardships. We don't know why they are wrapped up in that struggle and that sin. And so maybe if we would slow up in our life and take some time to sit with them and maybe talk with them and find out what's going on, maybe our judgment would slow down as well and we could have some compassion. Which then kind of brings us to the next thing I want you to do, and that is to remember your forgiveness. A couple weeks ago when we talked about forgiveness, this was one of my challenges to you as well, to remember the forgiveness that you were given by God, that God has extended to us through Jesus' sacrifice, such great forgiveness. It's time for us to extend that back to other people. It's easy to look at someone else and look at their situation and to be very cold and judgmental about their situation and forget that maybe you've been there too. Or maybe not in that exact situation, but maybe you've been in a similar time in your life, and maybe it's because you were in that situation that you're afraid to step back into it and to bring some compassion and some forgiveness. But we need to be willing to slow up and to go to a person and to remember what it was like when we went through that moment. In 2 Corinthians, it tells us that one of the reasons that God allows us to go through pain and heartache is so that the God of comfort will comfort us so that we can then comfort others. And there's real power in sitting with someone who is going through a hardship and saying, I know, and really knowing what that's like. Because there are other people sometimes that try and step into people's lives that truly don't know and don't know how to minister to them and listen to them. But maybe within your life, you come across a person who is going through a struggle similar to your own, one in the past, one in the present, and it gives you the opportunity to slow up and say, I know, and to sit with them and to just be present, which is the next thing I want you to do, to just be present. Sometimes we can feel like we need to fix things. I'll admit it, I'm a fixer. I like to fix stuff, and sometimes I like to fix people, but that's not my job. My job is not to fix people. We can go into situations and we can feel like we know how to fix the situation, right? We can feel like we know how to fix the time. We can see, remember that this is like the whole armchair quarterbacking thing? We can feel like we know what they should do. We can feel like we know how they should react. Friends, people in our lives are not meant to be our projects. And so we need to not see them constantly as our projects. No, we step into their life and we show them compassion and we show them love. And we walk alongside them as God remakes them, as God renews them. You know, I think we've all been in that place, maybe where we've kind of been going through a heartache or a hard time, and we've had someone else step in with the advice. It's like, oh boy, here we go. And they fire away their thoughts, their advice, and what they think that you should do. And we know how it didn't really help us. But instead, if we just had someone to walk alongside us, maybe that's what it would have taken to get us through it. You just want a friend, someone to see you as a person. Because the time is going to come, like I said, that we go through life and we go through these hardships, and maybe it's a temptation or a struggle or whatever that we have in our own life, and we can then be present with someone else. Just like Jesus had compassion on that woman, who everyone kind of left and the dust is settling and he sees her, and sure, he addressed the situation, but then he was just there with her. Friends, it can be really easy for us to look at situations. It can be really easy for us to look at other people and to armchair quarterback it, to think of, well, if you had only done this, or if you had only done that. But that's not what they need. We feel like we know how things should have gone had they acted different. Maybe the most important thing that we can do for a person is not to step in and to fix them. And truthfully, maybe the most important thing in our lives is even not for God to step in and fix them, but for us to just have his compassion come into our life. And maybe it's going to come through a person. Maybe it's going to come through you. So keep your eyes open. Slow up. Remember your forgiveness and be present with people. Father, we come to you and we thank you for the moments when you have been present in our life. And we recognize that there are times in our life that we would just much rather you take away the pain. We would much rather you just say the word and fix it all. But God, we know that we're going to then step into another moment of hardship and another moment of pain. And so God, we're grateful that you, through your Holy Spirit, come and you are present with us. And we're so grateful that you also use your people to come and be present with us. So God, I pray right now, I pray for those who need some compassion in their life. I pray for those who are going through these situations. Maybe it is a sin. Maybe it is some type of physical ailment. Maybe it is some kind of just situation that they just can't break free from. Whatever it might be, God. Lord, I pray that you would help them to feel your compassion right now. And God, I pray for those around them, each one of us, to also be looking for how we can share your compassion with other people. Because it's so easy. It's so easy for us to judge and move on. It's even so easy to say, oh, I'll pray for you and move on, do nothing to show compassion. God, help us to slow up. Help us to see those moments, those times where we can be compassionate and to share that compassion with other people and to make just a difference for them, God. Maybe the difference that they've been waiting on. Use us, Lord. Use us for your glory in that way. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, we're going to finish things off by singing about this Jesus that we've been studying. And I hope, again, as we roll through these different weeks, you're seeing ways that you can pull these characteristics in your own life. So why don't we stand together and sing this final song as we close out.